هذا كتاب أنزلناه مبارك فاتبعوه واتقوا لعلكم ترحمون.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue with Surah Al-An'am and verse number 118 and 119 and maybe 120 inshallah. Verse number 118 from Surah Al-An'am and the Tafseer of Imam Al-Sa'di رحمه الله. يقول الله عز وجل: فكلوا مما ذكر اسم الله عليه إن كنتم بآياته مؤمنين وما لكم ألا تأكلوا مما ذكر اسم الله عليه وقد فصل لكم ما حرم عليكم إلا ما اضطررتم إليه وإن كثيرا ليضلون بأهوائهم بغير علم إن ربك هو أعلم بالمعتدين وذروا ظاهر الإثم وباطنه إن الذين يكسبون الإثم سيجزون بما كانوا يقترفون. A translation of these three verses. So eat of that meat on which Allah's name has been pronounced if you are believers in His ayat. And why should you not eat of that on which Allah's name has been pronounced while He has explained to you in detail what is forbidden to you except under compulsion of necessity? And surely many to lead mankind astray by their own desires through lack of knowledge. Certainly your Lord knows best the transgressors. Leave sin open and secret. Verily those who commit sin will get due recompense for that which they used to commit. Since the surah is about the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and muhajjat and mushrikeen, refuting the arguments of the polytheists and those who associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is now the verses starts about the shara'a, the matters of legislations and ruling that the mushrikeen were upon, which is something that they invented to themselves, which is against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them, commanding the believers to be away from them, to be distinct, to be different from the ways of the mushrikeen. The mushrikeen, they follow their desires. The believers, they follow the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, based on what has been mentioned throughout the entire Quran and from the beginning of the surah, that everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the only one worthy of worship, and therefore He's the only one that for people to be in obedience and obedient in the absolute sense. And since the previous verse, إِنَّ رَبَّكَ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ مَنْ يَضِلُّ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ, your Lord, He knows best who deviate from His path, and He knows best the guided ones. So now who are the guided ones? Those who worship Him alone subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also with the ahkam, with the rulings. So the first ayah number 118, فَكُلُوا مِمَّا ذُكِرَ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ إِن كُنتُم بِآيَاتِهِ مُؤْمِنِينَ. Imam Al-Sa'di rahimahullah, he says, يَأْمُرُ تعالى عباده المؤمنين, as you see on the screen, يأمر تعالى عباده المؤمنين بمقتضى الإيمان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, He is commanding the believers بمقتضى الإيمان, as a result of their iman. If they are believers, because it says in kuntum بآياته مؤمنين, if you are believers, then to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to submit yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as mentioned before, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, in the Aqidah subject, that do they think that they will be created and not to be commanded and not to be forbidden? That means this is, it cannot ever be perceived by someone understand the purpose of life. So the ibadah is to be commanded to do certain things and to be forbidden from other things, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the owner of all things. So يَأْمُرُ تَعَالَى عِبَادَهُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ بِمُقْتَضَى الْإِيمَانِ. And from that, the mafhum of that, the understanding of that, the mushrikeen, they do not receive their commands from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They make up their own ways based on their desires. So there's no submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a result of their shirk and associating partners with Allah. He says, وَأَنَّهُمْ إِن كَانُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ, and therefore if they are believers, فَلْيَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا ذُكِرَ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ بَهِيمَةِ الْأَنْعَامِ, then let them eat from what the name of Allah has been pronounced, ذُكِرَ, اسم الله عليه upon بهيمة الأنعام, the cattle, and بهيمة الأنعام are the cows and the goats and the sheep and the camels also included, anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for them to eat. وغيرها, بهيمة الأنعام and وغيرها, and other than بهيمة الأنعام, من الحيوانات المحللة, from the animals that are permissible for us to eat. And who's the one that permitted or forbade? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one has the right to forbid or to permit when it comes to this except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's part of al-iman. وَيَعْتَقِدُ حِلَّهَا. So eat from it, and the command here is not amr al wujub, is not like you have to go now and eat some of the meat that the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been pronounced on it. This is al-amru lil-ibaha. Al-amr that it's permissible for you. This is permissible. This is something for you to do, and that's why you do what is permissible. Whatever, if someone doesn't feel like eating it, it's not something wrong. But if someone would forbid something that Allah permitted, then it's haram. If someone says eating what Allah permitted is haram, or even if someone would think that this is out of righteousness or out of zuhd, that a person would abstain from eating these types of things, is never heard of from the people of knowledge, as Imam Tabari rahimahullah, when he made the tafseer of the ayah. Something that is not from the way, of course, of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, it's not permissible. So this is al-ibaha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted this. وَيَعْتَقِدُ حِلَّهَا. And they believe, يعتقدوا from al-i'tiqad, حِلَّهَا, that it's halal. So to believe that it's halal, and that the ruling of it, that it's permissible for you to eat if the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pronounced on it while it's being slaughtered. وَلَا يَفْعَلُوا كَمَا يَفْعَلُهُ أَهْلُ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. And they are forbidden, do not do what the people of al-jahiliyyah, the people of ignorance, they would do. مِن تَحْرِيمِ كَثِيرٍ مِنَ الْحَلَالِ, in which they would forbid many of the halal. They would forbid what Allah permitted, and it's mentioned in the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah and others. ابتداعا من عند أنفسهم. ابتداعا, bid'ah, innovation, from their own selves. وإضلالا من شياطينهم. وإضلالا من شياطينهم. He's making the tafsir of the two verses together. وما لكم ألا تأكلوا مما ذكر اسم الله عليه. What make you not eat from what the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being pronounced on? وقد فصل لكم ما حرم عليكم, till the end of the verse. So it shows that the disbelievers, or the people of Jahiliyyah, they would forbid certain things, they would permit certain things according to their own desires. ابتداعا من عند أنفسهم وإضلالا من شياطينهم. And from the idlal, from the deviation of their shayateen. فذكر الله أن علامة المؤمن. So the ayah here, and how is that related to al-iman? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that علامة المؤمن, the sign of the mu'min, مخالفة أهل الجاهلية في هذه العادة الذميمة. To مخالفة, to oppose, to be different than the people of Jahiliyyah, the people of ignorance, in this عادة, or this habit that is ذميمة, that is condemned. المتضمنة لتغيير شرع الله, which includes basically changing the shara of Allah, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated for his people. وأنه أي شيء يمنعهم من أكل ما ذكر اسم الله عليه. And what is the thing that would prevent them or withhold them or forbid for them to eat what the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been mentioned on. وقد فصل الله لعباده ما حرم عليهم وبينه ووضحه. In which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala فصل, that means give in details to his ibad, to his slaves, what he forbade on them, وبينه ووضحه, and made it very clear. البيان والتوضيح, which is synonyms, making things very clear, making things clear in the details of it and the rulings of it. فلم يبقى فيه إشكال ولا شبهة. So there's no إشكال, there's no problematic things in it to understand, ولا شبهة, no doubt. توجب أن يمتنع من أكل بعض الحلال خوفا من الوقوع في الحرام. That a shubha, maybe doubtful matter, that would make the person by necessity to stay away from eating some of the halal out of the fear of falling into the haram, from what is mentioned in the verse. So if an animal has been, the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been said upon it before it's slaughtered, and it's very clear, and it's slaughtered, and it's an animal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for us to eat, If someone says, no, I would stay away from it out of, again, zuhd, out of maybe leaving some of the halal, otherwise it might lead me to the haram. This is against what the ayat is mentioned. So that's why it says, وَمَا لَكُمْ أَلَّا تَأْكُلُوا وَأَيُّ شَيْءٍ يَمْنَعُكُمْ. What prevents you from eating what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for you? And that's why the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, when he forbade al-ghuluw, extremism, wat-tanattu', and this is one of the ways or one of the things that destroyed the nations before. إِيَّاكُمْ al-ghuluw, because it destroyed the nations before you. Al-ghuluw or extremism in any level. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted something, who can forbade it for whatever desires? And the desires doesn't have to be lustful desires. It can be, if it's correct to give it the name of religious desires. Someone is religious, someone is righteous, and he loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so he wants to do something to show this love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he does not follow the shara of Allah. He does not follow the laws of Allah, but he follows his desires, which is the love of Allah. And that's what al-bid'ah is all about. Al-bid'ah is not about some evil people out there trying to introduce things in the religion. Not all of it is like this. Some people are sincere, they're devoted in their deen, but the lack of knowledge, they would introduce things in the deen that is not part of it, thinking that this is something that is pleasing to Allah. And it's more evil than the sins. Why? Because it's qawlun ala Allahi bila ilm, saying about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without knowledge. So this is the meaning of وَمَا لَكُمْ أَلَّا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا ذُكِرَ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. Like the ayah, وَمَا لَكُمْ أَلَّا تُقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالْمُسْتَضَعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ. What's the matter with you? What makes you stay away from fighting for the sake of Allah when the weak and the oppressed, as it's mentioned in Surah An-Nisa? So what prevents you from eating what the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being said and pronounced on it? وَقَدْ فَصَّلَ لَكُمْ مَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala indeed had فَصَّلَ لَكُمْ. It's not ambiguous, it's not clear, it's very clear what He forbade on you. إِلَّا مَا اضْطُرِرْتُمْ إِلَيْهِ, except what you have a necessity, a life or death situation, then the haram becomes halal only for whatever the darura is. So this is, he says here, وَدَلَّتِ الْآيَةُ الْكَرِيمَةُ. This ayah, دلت, from الدليل, gives an evidence على أن الأصل في الأشياء والأطعمة الإباحة. The word al-asl is the foundation. And if it's mentioned in the subject of ruling or fiqh or this matter, that means this is the norm. The ruling that everything is al-aslu fil ashya. The original ruling, everything is permissible. Wal-at'ima. Anything and any food is permissible. وأنه إذا لم يرد الشرع بتحريم شيء منها. And if the shara, if the deen of Allah does not come يرد, brings any tahrim, anything to prove that it's haram, شيء منها, any of it, فإنه باق على الإباحة. Then it stays in the original ruling, which is al-ibaha, which is permissible. So everything is permissible unless proven otherwise. So if someone says, prove that eating rabbits is haram, or it's halal, I'm sorry. If someone says, prove that this is halal. No, we say to him, prove that it's haram. You bring the proof that it's haram. Everything is halal unless proven otherwise. So this is the meaning of al-asl fil ashya wal at'ima al-ibah. Yes, a person should ask. He should not rely upon his ignorance. Or since everything is permissible unless proven otherwise, he doesn't know that al-mawquda wal mutaraddiya wal natiha, the animals when it's suffocated or shot by gunfire, it's haram. He doesn't know this ruling, so he says everything is permissible. No, everything permissible in the Shara, not according to your ignorance or your knowledge. In the Shara, in the deen of Allah, that has been made clear, everything is permissible unless proven otherwise. فَمَا سَكَتَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ فَهُوَ حَلَالٌ. So as a result of this ruling, and we benefit a great deal in the tafsir of Imam Sa'di with these qawa'id, with these principles, that many things applies to it. And this is how the ilm, a person would learn the knowledge not just by knowing many masail, but rather knowing the foundations of it, the principles of it, so that everything can be related to it. So, فَمَا سَكَتَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ فَهُوَ حَلَالٌ. Anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say anything about it, that means it's halal. لأن الحرام قد فصله الله. Because the ayah says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the haram in details, mentioned it in details. So this is the tafsil, or the details has been mentioned in the haram. Because of the tafsil in the halal, endless halal. So when only these things are forbidden, that means everything else is halal. And this is one of the miraculous ways of matters of the deen of Islam. And even in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, for example, when he was asked about what al-muhrim should wear, the one in state of al-ihram, he did not say he should wear this and this and that. He says he should not wear, certain things. So if it's not permissible to wear certain things, that means everything else is permissible. So this is what he means by this. فما سكت الله عنه فهو حلال لأن الحرام قد فصله الله. Because the haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it very clear. فما لم يفصله الله, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make tafsil of it, فما لم يفصله الله فليس بحرام. It is not haram. ومع ذلك, and with that being said, فالحرام الذي قد فصله الله وأوضحه, the haram that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made clear and in details, قد أباحه عند الضرورة والمخمصة. That haram that has been made clear in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that it's haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted it whenever there is a necessity. والمخمصة فمن اضطر في مخمصة. الاضطرار and المخمصة is when a person is certain, according to the means that he has, that he will die if he does not eat. Not a need or not he's tired. It's a definite death. And the only way to save himself from death because of the famine, because of what he's going through, is to eat something haram that is known to be haram. Then it becomes permissible. We even said it's obligatory upon him to eat from it, غير باغ ولا عاد, as it's mentioned in other verses of the Quran, without transgressing, without going beyond what is needed. So if it only 2 bites, then 2 bites, not more than that. Not to enjoy the haram, just to take care of this necessity that he is upon. So, and with this tafsil of the haram, أباحه الله عز وجل عند الضرورة والمخمصة. كما قال تعالى, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير, the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, إلى أن قال فمن اضطر في مخمصة غير متجانف لإثم فإن الله غفور رحيم. Whoever is in state of ضرورة, and that is also, it's a well-defined state, which is الضرورة في مخمصة, and that's what المخمصة is, in the dire famine need, غير متجانف لإثم, without inclining to commit sins, فإن الله غفور رحيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiving. ثم حذر عن كثير من الناس. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned against many of the people. فقال وإن كثيرا لا يضلون بأهوائهم بغير علم. That indeed many, وإن كثيرا, since the previous verses, وإن تطع أكثر من في الأرض يضلوك عن سبيل الله, if you obey most of the people on the face of earth, they would lead you astray. So وإن كثيرا لا يضلون وإن كثيرا لا يضلون بأهوائهم. Many they would لا يضلون, they would deviate others by their desires. And this is also, there's a recitation, لا يضلون. So لا يضلون, they deviate others by their desires, or they themselves they deviate, and of course both are correct. وإن كثيرا لا يضلون بأهوائهم, he says here, أي بمجرد ما تهوى أنفسهم. Just once their nafs, their own self desires something, they go for it. They follow their desires. And whoever follows his desires in the absolute sense, that means he's deviated. So, and this is a way also to know whether a person is taking the path of deviation or not. Every time he desires something, he goes after it. Every time he desires something, he goes after it. If it's not in the boundaries of the Shara and the Deen of Allah, then, or without the knowledge of it, that means he can be leading himself astray. And at the same time, it shows that if the hawa, if the desire is according to the Deen of Allah, it's a rewardable thing. So someone desired to eat something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted, beautiful, mashallah. He gets reward for it and he enjoys it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted it. وإن كثيرا لا يضلون بأهوائهم أي بمجرد ما تهوى أنفسهم بغير علم, without knowledge. He says in the Tafseer, ولا حجة, and no evidence. فليحذر العبد من أمثال هؤلاء. So let al-abd, the slave of Allah, be warned against the like of these people. وإن كثيرا لا يضلون بأهوائهم بغير علم. So to be warned against the disbelievers, those who follow their desires, be warned. That means take precautions, do not follow their ways, because everything to them is permissible, everything is according to their desires. وعلامتهم, and their sign, كما وصفهم الله لعباده, their signs as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described them to his ibad, أن دعوتهم غير مبنية على برهان ولا لهم حجة شرعية. That their da'wah, their deen, their call is not built, غير مبنية, is not built on evidences. ولا لهم حجة شرعية, is not based on a religious evidence. Because again, what permits and what forbids is only the wahy from Allah. So they don't have it, it's only their desires. Or if they have something distorted. وإنما يوجد لهم شبه بحسب أهوائهم الفاسدة, but only what they have is shubha, the plural of shubha, doubts, or things that are not clear according to their corrupted desires. And if the shirk is there, which is the foundation, then the desires is corrupted. So, and it's different than ijtihadul ulama in what something that does not have a nas or a text in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and they're people of knowledge, and they're based on the Tawheed, and they know the deen of Allah, the halal, the haram, and they are the ones that has the right to make ijtihad in some other things, not X, Y, and Z of human beings. They can make their own ijtihad. They think it's ijtihad, but it's desires. So here, وإنما يوجد لهم شبه بحسب أهوائهم الفاسدة وآرائهم القاصرة. Their corrupted desires and their opinions that are deficient. آراء, رأي, القاصرة, that means it falls short from being correct. فهؤلاء معتدون على شرع الله وعلى عباد الله. These people are, they transgress on the shara of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وعلى عباد الله, and on the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So الاعتداء على شرع الله is when someone is following their desires and their own opinions and not following the shara of Allah. Even if a person sounds decent and nice and he loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have to follow the wahy from Allah. والله لا يحب المعتدين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love المعتدين, those who transgress the limits. بخلاف الهادين المهتدين, different than those who are guided and they guide others. فإنهم يدعون إلى الحق والهدى. Indeed, they call to the truth and guidance. ويؤيدون دعوتهم, and they support their da'wah, their call, بالحجج العقلية والنقلية, with the evidences that is based on al-aql wal-naql. And al-naql, of course, comes first, which is the text, the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is supported by the proper sound mind, but not the mind that is corrupted. When a person would think that it's not corrupted, it has to be perfectly with the shara', because the shara' would never come to contradict what is sound mind. ولا يتبعون في دعوتهم إلا رضا ربهم والقرب منه. And they do not follow in their da'wah, in their call, except the pleasure of the Lord and to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the disbelievers versus the believers, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling the believers to be upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them. وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا لَيُضِلُّونَ بِأَهْوَائِهِمْ بِغَيْرِ علم. What is the ilm here in this context very clearly is the ilm of the shara', is the ilm of the deen of Allah, the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ رَبَّكَ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُعْتَدِينَ. Your Lord knows best the mu'tadeen, those who transgress the limit. This is what he mentioned here in these two verses. And of course, the mentioning the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the animal before slaughtering it, it's an obligation. Right? So it has to be said. And the ayah is a clear evidence to this, which is also going to be mentioned. وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وَإِنَّهُ لَفِسْقٌ. Do not eat the meat that the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not pronounced on it, and it's fisq. It's major sin, it's rebellious, being against the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is with the details of this very briefly, that if the ways of the disbelievers, which is clearly in the context, and the Arabs, if they slaughter the animal, if they don't, they would mention the name of something. Every time they would slaughter, they would mention the name of what they're slaughtering the animal for. Idols, a respected person, whatever there is. And all of that is, of course, makes it maita, makes it impure, makes it not permissible for a person to eat because it's based on their desires, not mentioning the name of Allah on it. If someone, so this is if someone mentioned the name of other than Allah. This is obvious, no differences of opinions, consensus among the ulama that it's not permissible to eat such meat. If a person is slaughtering the animal, but he intentionally did not say the name of Allah and did not say anything else, and intentionally doesn't say Bismillah, then it's also not permissible for a person to eat that meat. And we'll come back to this one again, inshallah. If a person forgetfully slaughtered an animal and he forgot to say Bismillah, this is permissible to eat. He forgot to say it. So even if a Muslim, wants to, and of course, with regards to those who are permissible for us to eat their meat, Muslimin and the people of the book, and that's it. Jews and Christians only, not beyond that, because this is how the Wahy says. So if they forgot, then السهو رفع عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان. My ummah is not going to be responsible for the mistakes and the nisyan or forgetfulness. The second one, which we mentioned, if someone intentionally doesn't say Bismillah, the Jumhur of Ahl Ilm, that this is also not permissible. Except, according to some of the Shafi'is, they mentioned that, I'm just saying that because of if someone come along with some of the difference of opinions, they say that this is something that is permissible from a person that is valid for him to slaughter the animals. If they did not say Bismillah on it, refer to these contexts. But this is again an opinion that is not the strong opinion. And based on the ayat, how can someone say otherwise? They have, of course, their valid arguments in this matter. But this is definitely to stay away from. That if a person doesn't say Bismillah intentionally, then it is not permissible to eat this meat. So after that, the ayah says, وَذَرُوا ظَاهِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَبَاطِنَهُ وَذَرُوا ظَاهِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَبَاطِنَهُ. And I know that the question is going to be so much with regards to the meat and the practicality of it. We want to, at the best of our ability, focus on the tafseer of the ayat, inshallah. And the ahkam, it can has its own settings, inshallah. But the most important concern here is the tafseer of the ayat and how is that related to the tawheed of Allah, and how the ahkam of al-shar' in principle of the believers is different than the ways of the disbelievers because of the tawheed versus shirk, and how the shirk would make them led astray in their rulings and their legislations. So the ayah then, وَذَرُوا ظَاهِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَبَاطِنَهُ. Leave ظاهر الإثم, the apparent sin, and the batin, which is the secret one or the hidden one. He says here, المراد بالإثم. What is meant by al-ith? جميع المعاصي التي تؤثم العبد. All of the ma'asi, all of the disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that makes the person sinful. And being sinful, that means a person disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أي توقعه في الإثم, that make him fall into the sin, والحرج, and the unease and the difficulty, من الأشياء المتعلقة بحقوق الله, from the matters that are related to the rights of Allah, وحقوق عباده, and the rights of the slaves of Allah, which is basically the rights that needs to be observed, the haqq of Allah, the rights of Allah, and the rights of the human beings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the believers to observe. فنهى الله عباده عن اقتراف الإثم الظاهر والباطن. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade his ibad from committing the sin, the apparent, the openly ones, and the inward or the secret ones, الظاهر والباطن. أي, what is الظاهر والباطن means? السر والعلانية, the secret and the openly committed sin, secretly and openly. Whether it's secretly related to human beings to one another, or secretly in one's inside his own self, shirk, for example, or hypocrisy, versus what is done physically. المتعلقة بالبدن والجوارح والمتعلقة بالقلب. The one that is related or attached to the physical body and the different parts of the body, والمتعلقة بالقلب, and what's related to the heart, which is the inward part, الباطنة. And القلب, oftentimes it refers to what's the inside of the person. ولا يتم للعبد ترك المعاصي الظاهرة والباطنة إلا بعد معرفتها والبحث عنها. لا يتم للعبد. The abd would never have to perfect this and to complete this command of Allah by leaving the sins الظاهرة والباطنة, the physical and the non-physical, the apparent and the hidden ones, and all of this, إلا, except بعد معرفتها, except by knowing it, والبحث عنها, and searching for it. So a person has to have the knowledge of it first, what's forbidden, and then he would stay away from it. فيكون البحث عنها ومعرفة معاصي القلب والبدن. So therefore to search, to look for it, and to know these sins with the heart and with the physical body, والعلم بذلك, and having the knowledge of it, واجبا متعينا على المكلف. It's wajib, it's an obligation. متعين, that means it's upon each one that is mukallaf. He's mukallaf, he's responsible for his actions, reach the age of puberty, he is sane, and so on. Then he has to know what's haram and what's halal. And it's not enough excuse to say, I didn't know. Unless he's sincere and he's looking for it and asking for it and he doesn't know it. وكثير من الناس تخفى عليه كثير من المعاصي خصوصا معاصي القلب. And this is a very important point. He says كثير من الناس, many of the people, many of the sins are hidden from them. They do not know it. خصوصا, especially the sins done by the heart. كالكبر والعجب والرياء. Arrogance, liking oneself, showing off. And that's why you would find, since Islam is a level that comes before the level of Iman, when someone embraces Islam, when someone wants to be steadfast upon the deen of Allah, the concern usually about the physical things. This is how physically you do things. And this is halal and haram like this. But equally, or even more importantly, since this is the foundation of all deeds, is the deeds done by the heart. And the sins done by the heart. So there are sins done by the heart, and it's an obligation upon the person to learn it and to know it and to forbid it on oneself and to stay away from it and to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify himself from it. And the physical actions, and there are details in this. If something physical, it's the easiest thing to stay away from it. And a person is away from it. But the heart, it's not more difficult, but it's to be treated differently. That means a person has to be patient with himself. He has to stay away from it and turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and to know that this is a sin and to hate it, and to be able to judge or oneself, because not judging anyone's else heart because it's hidden, it's oneself, one's heart. We can see the physical actions of others, but we can't see what's in their hearts. But we know what's in our hearts. So this is an obligatory knowledge. ونحو ذلك, and the like of that, حتى إنه يكون به كثير منها وهو لا يحس به ولا يشعر. And it reaches a state where he would have many of it, many of these diseases of the heart and the sins done by the heart, وهو لا يحس به, and he's not feeling it, ولا يشعر, he does not realize, does not know that he has it. وهذا من الإعراض عن العلم وعدم البصيرة. If this is the case, this is one of the signs or the examples of إعراض. This is someone that turned away from having the obligatory knowledge. وعدم البصيرة, and not having the ability to see through things, to have the proper vision. So imagine someone doesn't want to learn how to make salah. This is i'rad, this is a sinful thing. It's an obligatory thing upon him. So the same thing when someone is turning away from learning of the sinful acts done by the heart. Whether it's shirk, whether it's kibr, whether it's riya, whether it's ujb, and so on. So because the command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَذَرُوا, stay away from ظاهر الإثم, what's ظاهر, what's apparent, what's clear, what's physically, وباطنة, and the batin, the inward of it. إن الذين يكسبون الإثم سيجزون بما كانوا يقترفون. Indeed, those who يكسبون, earn, those who commit the sins, will be recompensed according to what they indulge themselves in. And that's why he says, ثم أخبر تعالى أن الذين يكسبون الإثم الظاهر والباطن سيجزون على حسب كسبهم. And he informed us subhanahu wa ta'ala that whoever earns and commit these sins الظاهر والباطن سيجزون, they will be from الجزاء, they will be recompensed according to their kasb, according to their earning, according to their actions of the sin. وعلى قدر ذنوبهم, and according to their sin. قلت أو كثرت, whether it's less or more. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just. وهذا الجزاء يكون في الآخرة. This recompense is when? In the hereafter, not in this life. وقد يكون في الدنيا, it can be in this dunya. يعاقب العبد فيخفف عنه بذلك من سيئاته. If something happens to him in this dunya, like the hudud and the like of it, or anything that bad that happens to the person, فيخفف عنه, it will be then made easy for him from his sayyat. Kafara expiates his sins in this life. And that's why anything that is of discomfort or pain or anything that a person faces in this life, it's all expiations of sins. And as mentioned before, a person should stay away from praising himself or saying, oh, it's to elevate the levels of the person. Right? No, it's for expiation of the sins. And of course, yes, because it's either expiation of the sins or elevates the level of the person, but as a way to treat oneself, not to look at oneself as a person has been chosen or a person, or you have to humble yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have good expectations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful, and never to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be tested or to have the sins expiated by trials, but rather to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for al-afiyah from every matter. So this is what is mentioned in the tafsir of the ayat, and the tafsir is one thing, and then to act upon it and to reflect upon it and to relate everything into our life. This is definitely a duty that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us always in that state of not the ghafla, not the forgetfulness, but to be aware of things so that we correct ourselves by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll stop here inshallah ta'ala. First of all, the attendance code is مما ذكر اسم الله. مما ذكر اسم الله. It's not a full sentence, but it's okay. Of what the name of Allah is mentioned. مما ذكر اسم الله. صلى الله عليه وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم.